So this is a really amazing panel that we're going to have. When Adrienne and I were talking about civic engagement, it's interesting to be thinking about the framing that Adrienne is going to present. I'll steal it. Is that the city's open data program is a digital first municipal service, right? It's online. It's designed through a website, servicing data from a website or computers. And when you think about when you think about services, government services in the 21st century, how do you start to bring in examples of physical services and then manifest that in a digital platform? We see these conversations that are going to be happening in this room 2 hours from now, when NYC Opportunity is going to be on the stage talking about how they do digital services and physical services. This is going to be this is going to be an amazing panel. Let me start off with that. The idea of this is, what are the different pathways into government? How can the various existing touch points and channels be used to increase citizen government engagement? And this is going to be hosted by a moderator, by Elana Shneyer, who is a collaborator of BetaNYC and a contractor. I will say that also, just transparency. Mike Ward from Democracy Works, and Adrienne Schmoeker, who was upstage a little bit earlier, and then followed up by Joel Castillo. Yeah? Close? With that, please hold your questions to the end. Elana's going to embody and we're going to be running around some microphones. So with that, I'm going to hand this thing off to Elana.
Thanks, Noel. Is this on? Now it's off.
So it's pushy. No, just wait.
Okay.
Connecting to the network. Connecting to the network. Connecting to the network.
It's like a Christmas experience.
Yeah, it's dialing up. There we go.
Wow. Okay. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to invite you to come on in. There's a couple seats. There's 2 seats in the front row for anybody who wants to be brave and come up here. And there's some seats maybe on the back over there. I invited people that are already here. If you have a burning question, take a second now and write it down so you don't forget it, because we definitely want to engage your questions as a way to also model what civic engagement might look like. Today's panel, we have some really good panelists, and I hope we're going to have a really interesting discussion around how government can engage more with its citizens, and how these different platforms and different ways that everybody is working is maybe creating new opportunities for civic engagement. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit about the opportunities and also some of the challenges that creates, and sort of, are we ready for that? So as we get started, I'd love for each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll start at the far end with Joel and talk just a little bit about your name and what you do and how you're sort of engaged with this. Is yours working?
Yeah, I think so. Is it good?
Yeah.
All right. Keeps on setting to turn off and on. My name is Joel Castillo. I'm the Director of Application Development at the New York City Department of Records. We are tasked with keeping track of the history of the city of New York, as well as helping people access government information that they need to do their day-to-day lives in New York City. Our 2 biggest platforms are the Government Publications Portal, which is a place where you can find any report, press release, whatever an agency has pushed out, it's going to be found in our search engine. And then the other big piece is the Open Records Portal. We're working with the Mayor's Office to unify the FOIA process throughout the entire city. As of Thursday, we now have 40 agencies using the Open Records Portal to accept FOIA requests and respond and post their documents online for everybody to see. We're working with the Mayor's Office actually to get the majority of the mayoral agencies using Open Records for their FOIA process by the end of this fiscal year on June 30th. So that's what we're working on now.
Great, thanks, Joel. And can you just, for those of us that don't know, can you tell us what FOIL is?
Yeah, so FOIL is FOIL is a way for you to request information from a government agency. Whatever we produce.
Otherwise, the internet can't hear you. Oh, your microphone is dying.
Just go old school. So FOIL is the Freedom of Information Law. It's the same idea as FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, which is the federal level. So in New York City, you can submit a request to any city agency for information, either about yourself or about their business processes, if you're interested in it. And they are required to provide that response to you. So what we do is make it easy for agencies to post documents that can be public, don't contain addresses and names and stuff, so that anybody would be able to find that FOIL request online. It's actually very nice. We've posted about 8,000 documents so far, and we've been live 2 years as of March 10th.
Joel, can I ask just one more trivia question, which is, how far back do the city records go?
Do you want to switch seats? No. This way you can. Okay.
So we have in our municipal library, we have documents dating back to the 1800s. And then in our archive, we actually have stuff back to the Dutch days of the city of New York, including a brick from 1634, I believe. So there's a lot of cool stuff in the archives. We're actually working on digitizing those as well.
I think that was worth passing the mic for. Okay. Adrienne, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Some of you heard me speak this morning. I'm the Director of Civic Engagement and Strategy for the New York City Mayor's Office of Data Analytics. We're a small team, a handful of data scientists and strategists. Our vision is to make New York City more data-driven. One of our key programs in doing that is the New York City Open Data Program. The program has been around for about 7 to 8 years. A law was passed it'll be 6 years next Wednesday, requiring cities to publish all eligible data sets by the end of 2018. New legislation was just passed in December, requiring that law essentially go on into perpetuity. So any new data sets discovered will continue to have to be published even beyond 2018. And we have close to 2,000 different data assets on New York City's open data portal, and we see about 20,000 visitors to the site on average per week. And while we're a small but scrappy team, we work with different open data coordinators, like Joel, at their agencies to identify data sets within their agency and make it available to the public.
Thank you, Adrienne. And are those visitors unique visitors, or?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, thanks. Mike, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm the TurboVote Program Director at DemocracyWorks. DemocracyWorks is a 501c3 based out of Dumbo, and our mission is to build data sets and technology to help upgrade our democracy. And I'll ask a little trivia question and give you the answer later on while you guys can chew on it while I'm talking about DemocracyWorks. George Washington lost an election once, the first election that he ran to have a position in, before we were the United States. And then his competitor who beat him in that election chose a campaign tactic that George Washington said he did not want to do, and his competitor won. And so in the second election, George Washington adopted this campaign tactic, which is no longer legal. So I'll let you imagine what that potential campaign tactic could be while I tell you a little bit more about DemocracyWorks. We have 3 program areas. One is the Voting Information Project. If you're familiar with the Google Civic API, it's the API through which it's a freely accessible API that you can use to find out if there's an upcoming election in your area. We collect the data from election officials, standardize and QA them, and provide them to Google. It's a project that's funded by Pew. So if you're familiar with Pew, the Pew Charitable Trust, those are the people who sort of own it. Then that was unexpected. And I'm the TurboVote Program Director. TurboVote is a public-facing tool that helps you register to vote. No matter where you live in the country, we can help you register to vote. We can help you vote absentee, and we send you text and email reminders for every election that you're eligible to vote in. Last year, we tracked over 7,000 elections in the United States, and that's not even a number that I can say with confidence because it depends on how you count elections. There are people who would look at that number and say that's impossible. Well, you're right, it depends on how you count. So that's how complicated democracy is nationwide. And so if you think you may have missed an election recently, you can go to turbovote.org, sign up for election reminders, and we'll make sure that you are not missing any elections. And then the third program area we have is our gov-facing department, where we work with election officials to build open source technology because, well, actually, I'm going to show a video, and that does a much better job of explaining some of the work that our gov department does. So while do you want me to start the video
yeah,
now?
you can do that, and I'll just introduce myself quickly. I'm Elana Shneyer. I'm a consultant. I have my own consulting company focusing on the interaction between community, and particularly community groups through the nonprofit sector, and government, and helping them work together more to engage more voices in our democracy. So I think we're all aligned in different areas, and I'm excited to see this video.
All over the country, election officials are working on new ideas to address the needs of their voters. But with limited resources, good ideas don't always take off. The Election Technology Cooperative is a nonpartisan, nonprofit community with one purpose: to build, scale, and share innovative election technology. Working together within this framework, we are making better tools more available and affordable to election officials everywhere. Join us.
All right. So, do you want to switch seats so that you can be next? You guys can share a mic more easily. Oh, you're back up. Great. To finish up that trivia question, should I stay over here or sit back up here? Sit. Okay, great. To finish that trivia question, George Washington, in his second election, in order to win, purchased an obnoxious amount of alcohol for the voters. He purchased 28 gallons of rum, 50 gallons of rum punch, 34 gallons of wine, 46 gallons of beer, 2 gallons of cider, and totaled over 160 gallons of alcohol. And he won, and he never lost again.
So that's one model of civic engagement. So we're going to talk a little bit more, get into it now. What are different pathways into government, and how can various existing touch points or channels be used to increase civic engagement or citizen engagement with government? I think is what we're talking about. So I'm going to start off by asking each of the panelists what they think civic engagement means. Anybody, whoever wants to start can start.
Oh, you want to start?
No, go for it.
I was going to say, I believe civic engagement is people working together, collecting their power to help improve the community around them. And today, to me, that does not mean only your immediate geographical community, but any sort of community that you participate in.
Interesting. So my definition might differ a little bit from that. I think of civic engagement as very similar to participatory government or participatory democracy. I view these kind of as synonyms a little bit, is any pathway or activity that increases activity with your government and strengthens democracy. Although in saying that, I realize there are plenty of things you can do outside of working with your government to strengthen democracy as well, so.
I guess I'm kind of in the middle ground between those. I view civic engagement as working with the data that your government provides you, be that actual data sets on the open data portal or reports about the flu in the city this year, in order to improve the lives of the people that surround you in your day-to-day life.
Great. So my next question was going to be why civic engagement. I've heard a little bit from both of you gentlemen on the stage with me about the idea of improving your community or improving government. Are there other reasons why one might want civic engagement?
I mean, I think there's the community building component of it, and we can argue that we're all social animals, and some of us might be introverts, but at the end of the day, we engage with others, and that there's inherent value in building community. I think that in living in this city, this state, this country, we're also part of a democracy, and democracy takes work and it takes energy. I think there's a question about what are our responsibilities as individuals to build community to make sure that that democracy continues to work.
Anybody else have anything they want to add to that?
There's something about voice, which is very similar, I think. Just that, to me, civic engagement is the way you ensure that you have a voice in your future. on a societal level.
So can you guys map out a little bit of what some examples of civic engagement might be, given these purposes of civic engagement and definitions that you just shared?
Well, I think you can go vote. You can use a data set from open data and use that to make the business case for change in your community. You can submit a FOIL request and use that information to advocate for change as well. I think where I start to get kind of a fuzzy line with civic engagement is also around, I think, a lot about customer service. I led client services in a startup that I worked at before I joined the city 3 years ago. And I'm a firm believer that maybe this will happen someday, but when you start working for government, that you should take some kind of customer service training. Like as soon as you start working for government, you are now a representative of this organization that's funded by taxpayer dollars. And whether you sit behind a desk all day and you're actually not speaking at events, like you are a representative of this organization, and you might have to interact with the public at some point, and you should interact with the public at some point. So I think for me, I think there's a question in my head about, is any interaction with government civic engagement actually? And I think I'm still trying to answer that question.
It's a great question. Joel, did you want to add something?
So on my end, the one example that we would love to have more of is people using our apps and giving us constructive feedback. We worked a lot with BetaNYC and a number of other organizations to build the open records portal. And then we haven't been able to keep up that type of interaction with the public on what else do you want to see in the portal? How do you want us to make it provide better data for you? Right now, we're kind of guessing at that. So we get a lot of engagement from within the city, but if you can just go to the website and look at the app and let us know, hey, maybe it would be better if you provided a graph of the FOIA requests that every agency is getting, in my specific example. But actually looking at the government services that are available and trying to think about how you would improve them is one of the best ways, I think, of improving your government through civic engagement.
I am very passionate about voting, so I have a favoritism toward that. But I take a very broad definition of civic engagement. I think civic engagement includes things like volunteering, all of the things that we're talking about already, but also things like volunteering and marching for anybody who's participated in protests. That is civic engagement to me. And calling your representatives is civic engagement, as well as participating very directly in government itself. So
I really like this sort of broad definition of it. I think in some of the work that I do, I like to particularly focus on increasing civic engagement around elections and voting. I've sometimes thought about it as like voting as sort of the center activity, and then how do you like radiate the vote more powerfully? And so some things are like being registered to vote is going to be a helpful key in that. And in New York City, probably registering with the political party, or kind of volunteering on a campaign would be sort of stepping up that engagement a little bit more, or working for your elected after they're elected, or so there's so many ways to engage, and that I think I like this really broad definition. I want to come back to that question that Adrienne was asking about, is any interaction with government civic engagement? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
As a government employee, I would say constructive interaction.
So are you? I'm like imagining on comments on like an open data set that you put out, being like, yeah, exactly, like F you, like this is so stupid, the government sucks, like those kinds of comments maybe not being. Although maybe it is a message around like it's sort of the engagement is there's not a lot of excitement or trust in government at the moment.
So those kinds of responses do mean something. It means you're unhappy with us and we need to improve, but it doesn't tell us how to improve. So in order for civic engagement to be successful, it needs to not be just this is horrible. I need to know why it's horrible, because otherwise it's going to stay horrible because I don't know how to fix it. So that's where I would put that.
And I think also that, and the more we talk about this, the more I think about this as we're talking about dialogue, right? Like how do we create a space in different vehicles for dialogue with this organization called government? Yeah, I don't know, that word just popped into my head as something that could be relevant here.
I'd say all of those things are civic engagement, but there's a difference between low-quality civic engagement and high-quality civic engagement, right? Okay. You need to be strategic. If you want to make a difference, you can say F you in a comment thread, and that's technically engaging, but it's not going to get you very far.
Yeah, that's a good point. So with this question of, I mean, we're talking about is the interaction between citizens and government, maybe through a data set or through a community meeting or something like that we're doing right now could maybe be considered civic engagement. Adrienne, you spoke a little bit about this sort of customer service, that everybody should be trained in customer service. And I'm wondering if we can explore a little bit on this panel right now, what does it mean to be a customer service type of thing? Like, is government servicing citizens? And or maybe at the same time, is it also, we've talked about this sense of responsibility. And so how would you kind of balance those, that it's sort of, democracy takes work, and democracy is, it is upon people who are citizens to use the tools from government or to use those different things. How would you kind of, I don't know if you're balancing the two, like customer service versus participation?
Yeah. I think that the way that I think about it in our work at Open Data is the difference between being reactive and proactive, and customer service is kind of how we're reacting to folks who are coming into us, which is extremely important. You know, I mentioned earlier today that we spent the last 2 days, Thursday and Friday, training our Open Data coordinators, more than 50 of them, for the first time in full-day trainings. And a key part of what we were training them on were kind of customer service standards, like how quickly you need to respond to an inquiry, and how you work with our team to do that. But then we also trained them on civic engagement, and we had great partners in the room like Sunlight Foundation, Build With, BetaNYC, who were teaching our open data coordinators, so here's how you're proactive with the community, here's how you go out there. And Stephen Larrick, who's I know here today from the Sunlight Foundation, he was telling them, you know, you're already doing civic engagement by publishing data. That's already, you're sharing information with the public, you're already taking a first step there. But then here are all of these other things you could do. Like, what if your agency tweeted whenever you released a new data set? What if you wrote up a blog post or did a video about, you know, more context about this information so that it's better used? And that's where I think that there's also a component of like civics education, I think, is a key element here. Like, the more I speak with people, the more I realize that, you know, which is completely understandable, I did not know how the city worked until I started working for it. Like, there's a mayor, there are deputy mayors, there are different mayor's offices, like there's more than one, there are different city agencies, the heads of city agencies are commissioners, you have a city council, you have borough presidents, like you have business improvement districts and community boards. Like, what is the civic ecosystem, and what is the best way for you to tap into that? Is it a tweet at someone? Is it showing up at your community board meeting? Is it going out to vote? Like, what is the spectrum of engagement that we would like New Yorkers to engage in that dialogue with us? And I think that, I'm not sure, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, so I did not get civics education here in New York State or in New York City, but I think that civics education is a core part of making civic engagement happen as well.
I think you really hit on something there. Like, how do you engage with government if you don't even know what question to ask, or if you don't even know what level of government to be engaging with, or you don't know where the question you have will be answered? Like, how does one understand that? So how did you guys, quick detour, learn about civics? I mean, Adrienne, you just spoke about your experience working in government was the moment that sort of taught it to you, but Joel and Mike, I'd be curious to hear your own experience with that.
I used to work in human rights and found that to be extraordinarily valuable, but also saw that there were barriers that the system created, and I thought that democracy needed work if we were going to be able to maximize every other issue, whether it's human rights or education or anything else. So I volunteered a lot. I volunteered all over the city for different people and figured out the lay of the land just in like the civic engagement space on the nonprofit side rather than the government side. And that, to me, was the best way to feel out where my interests were and to find a professional trajectory that worked for me.
I just kind of got dropped into it. I started out as a high school intern working for the Department of Records and kind of had to survive by learning who I needed to go to reach out for different information, how I could publish information so that people could find out about our holdings and stuff. And just as a result of that, naturally just started learning about how, and I'm still learning because there's a lot of stuff that gets confusing as a government employee anyway. But it was kind of just, I had to be there to learn it.
Yeah. I like that lesson of you just kind of have to do it to learn about it. And I think that's very much true for civic engagement, that you just got to kind of start taking some steps. And as you do it, you'll figure out what the right pathway is for you. So are we ready for a more civically engaged city? I think what the last panel I heard Noel talking about was like the speed, when you're publishing data and you're putting information out there, all of a sudden that information is a tool and it can be very powerful and is sort of exposing what's really going on. And that information might be coming out at a speed faster than maybe certain agencies or certain organizations or certain institutions or certain political parties are ready for. And how ready do you think we are for civic engagement, and is the government ready to respond to that engagement of citizens? And what's been your experience with that so far in your particular areas?
I would say that, so I was listening to the last panel that was in here with the Department of City Planning and Planning Labs, and they kept reiterating that change is slow. And I think there's a spectrum of excitement, I would say, internally about engaging with the public faster and better. But I think that it's our jobs as people who work on whether it's new digital pathways for civic engagement or who are just passionate about civic engagement generally, who are already within the city, to create the catalyst for culture change internally. And let people know that engaging with the public doesn't mean that what you say is going to be on the front page of the Post. Get rid of that myth. Talk to people. It's these are the people that you're serving. Get comfortable with that, and making that the new normal is, I think, what's going to make the shift.
Basically the same. I mean, I'm fortunate enough. My commissioner is a big advocate for transparency. So the way we work, for the most part, is publish it as it is, and then work with people so that you can form a conversation around the data. So the way it's worked for us is our agency is very happy with publishing something so people can see it and letting them know we're still working on this and we want your feedback. But as has been said before, change is slow, and we're working through the Open Records Portal. We're working with other city agencies to kind of give them a better way of being able to interact with the public so that they can get ready to actually have conversations around the work that they do.
So this might be an unpopular opinion on this panel, but just if we're talking about people being civic and whether government is ready for people to be more civic, I don't particularly care whether government is ready to be for people to be more civic. I want to push hard and fast and create a little chaos with strategy and see what comes out of that chaos. So I totally respect that the people who work in government are doing everything they can, and I hope to one day be one of those people. But for the moment, I would like to break things.
I just heard a talk this morning about sometimes when you break things, it creates new opportunities.
Yes.
So we're going to open it up in a minute. I'm going to ask the panel one more question. So get your questions ready. How can civic engagement help to create a more equitable and engaged city? So I'll end my section with the visionary question.
I focus a lot on power. I think power justifies itself. It is almost always corrupt to a degree, and I really want to find ways to distribute power more evenly, and that to me is, building more equity. So civic engagement to me is shifting power so that it is more equally shared, and that's sort of my vision for how I imagine this all working for the benefit of everybody.
Yeah, I think that for me, it's about having more voices at the table, or more voices as a part of the dialogue. If I look at some of the rough numbers, and these are going to be rough, we have 8.5 million New Yorkers who call New York City home, but we had, I think, less than 1 million people participate in the last mayoral election.
Correct.
we have 800,000 people who visited New York City's open data portal in 2017. Like, I don't think those should be the same numbers necessarily, right? And I know we have a certain number of people who call 311, something like 50,000 a day, maybe. Like, what are the right numbers? Like, what means that what are the KPIs for having a healthy democracy in New York City? I don't think we're there.
What do you think? Do you have a sense of what that number would be? I mean, is it realistic to think we're going to have 100% participation or 50% participation through a number of different measures?
I think we should be striving for that. I think that if you care about how your city is run, you should be participating. You should be finding a way to get informed, and you should participate. Now, it is on us to make it easier for you to participate. You shouldn't have to work for the city for 3 years to understand how to participate. I don't think that's right.
But I'm sure the city would love to have you work for them for 3 years. So,
I mean, as Adrienne was saying, if you have more people involved in making their opinions known, that will help us make a fairer city. And on my side, I'm working as hard as I can to push people to start releasing data. Our guidance for the Open Records portal is if you're going to post a document, make sure everybody can see it. You can redact the addresses or whatever, but make sure that the content of the document is available, that you describe what people are looking for. And if it's a data set, make sure it goes on the Open Data portal. Don't just send a printout of a spreadsheet. Make that searchable so that people can actually find the information. And once people find the information, then we need to start working with them so we can teach them how to use it, which is why Open Data Week exists.
great, yeah. I think what you guys are talking about, and I just want to sort of pull out and make it a little more clear, is a fundamental shift. And Adrienne, you talked about this a little bit. Is are we operating from an idea of fearfulness of engaging with the public, that what you say is going to be on the front of the post, and that's going to be a bad thing, as opposed to, wow, you're sort of like, this great thing happened. What if the news were that way? And also this sort of shift, that the assumption that more voices equals a better city. And I don't think that that is necessarily the underlying assumption in government and in institutions that sometimes do civic engagement. And so that is a big shift that has to happen. And I do think that from this space, a lot of that shift is happening. But just to kind of recognize, and I think that might be one of the reasons that culture change is so slow, because there's a value. There's two different competing values rubbing up against one another. So I would love to open up to questions. I see somebody in the back. We're going to pass the mic for questions? Okay. I think we want to do it on the mic so that people that are watching it through streaming can hear, because they can't hear outside of that. So.
I guess I'm going to take my prerogative as someone who's probably twice the average age of anyone else in the room. So I just take this from where it comes. I just wonder whether or not, in some sense, we're reifying age here. I've sat here for the morning, and it's a wonderful session. I'm learning gobs, and I applaud you all for it. But half the language that you used, I did not understand. And I'm wondering whether, in some sense, by turning to the web and turning to the computer sources that you're talking about, we are in some sense disenfranchising entire parts of the population, not only old people, but people who don't have computers, people who don't have access. Are we addressing that issue in terms of what we consider democracy and democratic involvement? Because I think that they're probably, in some ways, we're eliminating huge portions from that public voice.
Yeah, I thank you for that question. I just want to ask that to the panel of how do we make sure that this information is accessible, language, cultural references, access, all those different points at which, information and the way that we sort of ask questions changes over time.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that one thing that's really great about working for government, I came from the private sector before coming to work for the city, is that we don't get to choose who we're serving. Like we're here to serve everybody, and that's a beautiful challenge. So we need to think about, when we build websites, is it accessible? Do we have translation functions on the website? There's a guide that was just put out for all city agencies, making sure that we're checking all of the boxes before we create new digital products to make sure that it is accessible digitally. And I do think that you bring up a very good point, is that, and I think this was also brought up by Borough President Gail Brewer earlier, and also Councilmember Koo, is that, are people connected? Not everyone in New York City is even connected. Can they afford a mobile device? And these are core questions that, the CTO's office is looking to address. They have a broadband team here and are doing a lot of work to help connect the city as a first step. So there are all of these different layers, and it is inspiring working for the city, seeing all of the different people who are focused on these different populations. I think we need to connect the dots a little bit better. I know New York City open data, I'm sure that the majority of the population of our users are people who are digital natives, who are, have a computer at home, have access, and I know that there are populations who have just never heard about this. And that's where I take it upon, myself with my role as, director of civic engagement, to go out to the people who aren't finding us naturally, and go out there, go to the outer boroughs, go to the communities who, aren't going to naturally find this from a friend posting it on Facebook.
So hello, thank you for all of your comments. It was critical for me to listen to all of that. I work for the New York Immigration Coalition. So in my work, I lead our advocacy work across the 5 boroughs. It's 156 organizations that in this climate have an array of different problems beyond civic engagement. But we know civic engagement is crucial for us to think about representation moving forward. And so one thing I think that I struggle with is, specifically right now under this in this federal climate, under this federal administration, how do we get immigrant communities specifically, right? I was waiting, I was like, I hope someone says immigrant, I hope someone says immigrant, and I didn't hear anyone say immigrant the whole time, right? And so how do we think about the most disenfranchised communities across our city and how we're tying all of these tools and all of these activities into engaging them? And so I'm always looking for ways that we can work with other agencies and organizations, and even just figuring out like language access, right? I'll give it a quick example. No one cares about Arab Muslim representation in Brooklyn until this last city council race, when a Palestinian reverend pulled out 30% of a vote, right? And so no one was making civic engagement material in Arabic, right? Except for Bernie Sanders. And so like when we talk about local initiatives from commissioners, how are we communicating with different communities, and do they have to spend thousands of their own community hours and dollars into representation and engagement for the city to see them?
Thank you for that question. I think that groups like the New York Immigration Coalition and other nonprofit community-based organizations are essential to the civic engagement fabric of the city. And that in my work personally, my mission in my consulting is to help kind of those conversations happen more with government, because I think sometimes a lot of the mission-driven organizations in our communities have taken that upon themselves, and it would be ideal for government to take it upon themselves. But like any other institution, government is made up of people who have their own interests and are working on issues that they care about. And I think for the most part, people in government are in there because they want to serve. But to actually get government to serve all people, you need diverse staffing within government, you need diverse representation in government. And I think like you're talking about that campaign in Brooklyn, that sometimes when you all of a sudden engage an area or a group of people that haven't been engaged, you can see really different results. And that actually some of the keys to changing that representation is not targeting the same people who are always voting in an election, for example, and just saying like, vote for this person or that person so you're competing for the same pool. It's actually about increasing the pool. And that's how you actually make change. So I think all these types of steps are important. And sometimes, unfortunately, the advocacy groups are the people that are sort of raising the flag and bringing those issues forward. And it would be great one day for government to kind of proactively do that. But I think the partnership is the really powerful piece between community groups and government.
I can follow up and say, as a nonprofit, we rely on partnerships to reach community. We're not a public-facing nonprofit brand. We use partnerships to reach communities. And so we seek out partnerships with different community groups to try to reach those populations.
Yeah, and I would just add that we're always happy to partner with other groups. I mean, New York City, the fabric here, I think, There are more than 50,000 designated 501c3 organizations. Like, you are a key part of the fabric in making work happen in New York City, in different communities, and the representation that you bring to the table in dialogue is so critical. So I would just encourage you to, like, I know we would love to find a way to work with you guys.
Where's the next question?
If you allow me one quick comment on the question, the first question about sort of digital being maybe not inclusive, I highly recommend everyone see a movie called I, Daniel Blake, which is about how having too much emphasis on digital in government can actually be very problematic. It's focused in the UK, but super good for empathy for government workers, maybe having too much emphasis on digital. But I want to explore the intersection between sort of service delivery and civic engagement and wonder whether there can be more pathways between the two. So in some states, if you go to the DMV and fill out paperwork, you also get opportunity to register to vote, right? Could there be things where people, when they're calling through and want to complain about something, they get pointed to a community board meeting or participatory budgeting opportunities? Like, what are the ways, the pathways to transition those complaints into constructive opportunities for engagement?
Yeah, well, I'll speak to some of the work that we've done with New York City Open Data. I think that reinventing the wheel for every new program that comes out isn't the way that you're going to reach a lot of communities. I think your example of when you go to get your driver's license, you can also register to vote. Like, that's great. You know, there's a touch point there. How can we leverage it to get people more involved? For New York City Open Data, we saw that participatory budgeting in New York City reached more than 70,000 people in 2016, and I think more than 100,000 people in 2017. We're like, oh, these are people at the community level who are trying to make decisions about how to make their neighborhoods better. Open data can play a role in that. So we talked to the team, we developed like a one-page resource, and it got distributed to everyone in the last participatory budgeting cycle. So I think trying to figure out those pathways, because also thinking about the constraints of, you know, the number of people on each of our teams, like creating a whole new engagement vehicle is going to be really difficult. But how can we tap into these existing service streams, the existing communities that are out there, and, you know, make people aware of these other engagement vehicles?
I'm also going to plug the last panel in this room is going to be about the service design, which is a combination of physical and digital services.
Okay, I'm a health data analyst, and I'm struggling constantly with the two opposing tensions of making data useful and making data private. And I wonder if you could just comment in each of your areas how you guys are navigating that, because the more useful my analyses are, the less private they are. So I just wanted to hear from you guys what you guys can comment on that.
I'm lucky in that most of the data that we work with is voter file data, and therefore it's public record anyway. So we would never share personal information about anybody who signs up for our service, but the fact that anybody who's providing us data is also registering to vote means that the data that they're giving us is public record anyway. So that gives us an ability to be a little bit more open than other entities might be able to be.
Yeah, and I think that on our side, you know, for internal city data sharing purposes, there's, you know, more granular information, I'll say, that we use that we're not able to make open to the public. Like, we're very careful before any data sets are released. The agencies all have their general counsel review everything for any privacy issues. And, you know, that's of utmost importance. So I think there's always going to be that limitation towards how useful open data can be, because there's that certain level of granularity that just can't happen for privacy reasons.
And that being said, when it comes to FOIL, we've worked with a lot of city agencies on kind of ensuring that they're able to provide the most data possible while still keeping control of the private information. So we've been working with them on less redaction, just redact the really important parts, but still allow people to see the content of the document. Or when it comes to actually providing FOIL data, we're working with them so that we're working like on ways for people to submit a FOIL request, and we can automatically redact their private information and still make that FOIL log public, which reduces the workload on the agencies so they can focus on releasing data instead of having to sit with a Sharpie and cross out people's names through a 500-page document.
Are there standard privacy regulations in government that you guys have around like what information can't be released, or is it kind of, you talked about general counsel, is it different agency by agency?
I know that different agencies have different like the Parks Department is going to have very different types of needs around privacy than the Administration for Children's Services, for example. There's also active legislation around having a chief privacy officer and different chief privacy officers at every agency, which will be coming soon. So.
Hi, so I think open data is a great way to increase civic engagement, but as you mentioned, voter turnout has been spiraling downward locally, nationally. So there is an issue of trust and public trust in government. And so I'm wondering if you've considered going to schools to maybe advocate for civic courses or engagement courses. That's not something that's really taught in the school systems. I know that's like a statutory thing, but I'm wondering if you guys have considered kind of influencing this democratic process through the schools.
Yeah. What I can speak to and what I encourage you all to watch if you haven't already, so you might be familiar with the State of the Union address that the president does. There's also, the governor does it, the mayor does it. So we had the State of the City address February 13th, something like that, where the mayor actually announced a number of things around increasing civic engagement in the city, one of which is going to be, so they're going to have a voter registration initiative in all of the schools, and they're rolling out participatory budgeting at the school level as well. And he announced that they've created a new role, which we're waiting to hear more about, called the Chief Democracy Officer, actually, who's going to help with some of these initiatives.
There's also making sure, I'm sorry, there was a citywide program that just got cut, so it's also making sure that folks know. For folks that don't know, there used to be a student voter registration day, right? And so every year that has to be included in the budget for it to get funded. It's like a city initiative where they pull together nonprofits to do one full day of voter engagement. Really what it is a bunch of nonprofits going into schools and doing a full day of civics and actually doing voter registration on site. Those days, we've tapped 50,000 high school students and actually registered about 10K. And so now there's a new city council speaker, and so it's unclear whether programs like those will continue. And so it's important that we know what programs exist and are able to advocate the continuing of those programs, whether or not those folks may continue to carry them. So Student Voter Registration Day, also making sure that those are things that city council members individually can do. They can turn to their local high schools and they can turn to their local nonprofits and they can make those individual investments beyond the citywide investments.
So can I see hands or who else has questions? We have 10 more minutes. I wanted to see if we can get to all the people that have questions.
Okay.
Maybe we'll do 3 questions at once and then kind of respond. Is it?
Yeah. I will also plug something that BetaNYC is doing later on. I think it's the next panel after this, or it's going to be upstairs in the Hack Hall, and it's one of the classes that we teach to community boards and the general public on how you can integrate essentially open data and 311 data and the community board experience. And we call these things data journeys. And so community boards have to make all these different decisions. There's a lot of data that's on the data portal, and we're trying to figure out what's the connectivity between the data, the community board decision, and then the other government tools that are out there. And we're trying to offer this as a class in all 5 boroughs to all community boards, so that way the public, you, are aware of the types of decisions that community boards make, and then ultimately empower community boards to make better decisions with data.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marvin Holland. I've been working in politics for a long time, and my question is very brief, and it's probably more suited for Mike than anybody else. Is anyone looking at doing non-traditional civic engagement, particularly with like voter registration and stuff like that? We've been doing this stuff the same way for so long, and I always tell people the reason people don't turn out to vote is, one, they're not targeted by the consultants who run campaigns, but also we don't reach out to people who are not in the traditional places, and I was wondering if your organization was doing anything around that.
Do you want to answer quickly while we get to the next?
Who's
I want to take 2 questions, take a couple questions at once, and then we'll respond to them, just to make sure we get everybody's questions.
We're trying to build communities in different sectors to address voter engagement, and that's our bag, right? That's the civic engagement that we do. So we've got an organization of election officials building better tech. We've got an organization of companies that are working to increase voter turnout using their brands. That includes Facebook, Google, Snapchat, Twitter, Microsoft, and a number of other mostly tech companies, but there are others like Starbucks in there and Univision. Anyway, so we're building different communities. We're building a scholarship community, a college community where we're trying to get to college students because our tech is only for 18 plus. And if you put all of these sectors together, you represent a lot of the country. And so we're trying to hit voter engagement from a number of different angles and see what works. And we're taking sort of like an iterative approach to it.
Okay, so I want to take 2 questions before we answer for the panel for the next one.
Hey, so there seems to be a big emphasis on voter turnout as a form of civic engagement. And what I want to know is, how do people learn about their local candidates? How do people get more information about the campaigns that people are running, and what civic engagement tools are available via the city to learn about them?
Great. Okay, we'll come back to that. Great question. Over
other?
here, I know somebody's been 2 questions over here.
Hi, there was a lot of talk about government and government being kind of the city because there's a lot of people who work for the city here, but I work for a state agency that is scared of releasing data because we don't want to be on the cover of the Post. Well, they don't want to be on the cover of the Post. So kind of how do we work kind of civically to civically, kind of sharing data with other agencies, even at the city level or at the state level or federal level, and then how we work when maybe a question goes to the city, but it's actually a state agency. How do we work to make sure that's actually resolved and not, okay, email this person because that doesn't have to do with us?
Great. And can we just get the person next to you? We'll get that question, and then we'll answer these 3.
So we've been talking a lot about open data as a kind of exposing data as a broadcast mechanism, very top down. What about the idea of a bottom up approach to turn it into a conversation and ways that we can use data as an activist community to engage the government and actually create a multi-directional conversation there rather than just using what you put out?
Okay. So just to review, how do you learn about local campaigns and local candidates? What do you do when an agency or a level of government is scared to share information, and how do you share across different levels of government? And then from the bottom up, how can activists impact and have a conversation with government and shape the way that government or that our sort of society is working? Give you each a minute to answer this.
With a lot of local media going under, like Gothamist, I feel like as citizens we had to be auditors of local news and really be engaged with our community boards and have a lot of foundational knowledge about the way the civic ecosystem works in order to understand local politicians and their campaigns. And so, like, what is the city explicitly doing to open up and make that information more transparent about city council voting records and whatnot so we can make informed decisions?
Sure. So my disclaimer is that I don't work for the Board of Elections. I work on New York City open data. So I'll try to answer your question as best as I can. But I do not yet have intimate knowledge about all of the different agencies and all of the different initiatives that we're doing in the broader subject of civic engagement across the city. But I do know that I, as like a New Yorker, received like a pamphlet a few weeks before the local election in November, which I brought to the voting polls with me when I went to go out for the mayoral election. And according to the State of the City address, where the mayor addressed this, I believe they're looking to make that digital, which is great. So I know that there's conversation around that. I think it's worth seeing what the Board of Elections is doing around that issue specifically. To address the question about data sharing, over lunch, I was actually having a fun conversation with someone who's here, who's a colleague who works in a city agency, about carrots and sticks. And for open data specifically, we have a stick that works very well because we have a law. We have the open data law. And it's relatively effective to send an email that says, you are out of compliance. So that's very helpful. And what we've actually been trying to do, because we've been fortunate to have this law for almost 6 years, is that we've been trying to cultivate carrots in saying that we don't want people to think of this as an initiative where they're checking the box, where they feel like they have to do it. We want them to want to do this. We want them to think about open data, releasing information as part of their job, as part of what government should be doing more generally. And that's where honestly, the tactic I've been taking is building relationships. It's like speaking with agencies one by one, holding trainings like what we did over the last 2 days, recognition, and just kind of those soft approaches. I've been in this role for less than a year, so we'll see what happens, over the next few months, over the next few years. But constantly thinking about the carrots and sticks and the incentives of the people that you're working with to try to get them to, move in the direction that you're trying to go. And then on the third question about bottom-up data collection and sharing, I love that idea. I think that's amazing. Like, I would love for us, as New York City Open Data more specifically, if we're supposed to be the place where you get data about your city, municipally published data sets, that's just one part of it. The city is made up of cultural institutions, academia, the private sector. Like, can we be the home for data from, grassroots organizations from other places? Or maybe there are other data portals for these collective industries and sectors of the city. There's so much more information out there that's going to help us to understand this city. And I just love that idea. Put that out there.
Do you guys have any comments on that?
I can answer kind of to one of those. So we actually work a lot with New York State agencies to provide data. And what our FOIL officer does is he ensures that whoever's sending us a request actually gets a response from the state before handing off the request. So we're a customer service agency first. We have people who come in and actually purchase items from us, historical photos and stuff. So we're very careful about how we interact with our customers to make sure they get some kind of response before we just leave them alone. So if we can get other city agencies to work on that kind of follow-up, that's what we want to do, and that's what we try to encourage with the FOIL portal. It sends out messages whenever people are working on a FOIL request so that people are aware that the government is actually doing something for them. It's not that you just submitted a form and then you're going to get a response 20 weeks later.
I would say that what you're talking about in New York City, I think your question is the only one that I can really speak intelligently to, is not unique to New York City. And there are a lot of nonprofits trying to figure out how to surface information about ballot, what's going to be on your ballot, et cetera. Ballot Ready is one of them, and they started out of UChicago recently, but it's a really, really hard problem to solve. Local media would be great if it's something that we still supported as a society.
I want to speak to your question and sort of close out the panel, which is first of all to say thank you to everybody. And thank you to BetaNYC and all our sponsors. I think this question, and I think this relates to what you're talking about and what we've talked about today, is that I hope that from this panel you see that you have a lot of partners in government and in the nonprofit sectors and people from all over that are really dedicated to engaging more people in government, in building a better society through open source data, through promoting democracy, and through these different institutions. And government could be more responsive, and there's more information to put out there, and it's a participatory relationship, and it's a partnership, and that partnership really depends on people being involved. And so I think as we started on the panel, there's a number of ways to be civically involved, and if we kind of go to the local election stuff, if that's your issue, if it's something you care about, there's a lot of room to sort of step in and learn about when are the local races, right? Like odd years are city races, even years are state and federal races, generally speaking. In 2021, for example, we will have another city election where over 70% of our city council will be termed out. And so there'll be all these open seat races. So like, if this is your thing, talk to me. But if elections or voting is your thing, learn about it and become somebody that's going to be informing your community and learn about that and learn about how to put information out there about your candidates. But if your thing is about some other issue, do that and step up, because it's not just somebody the government's not going to be serving you and giving you what you want. Exactly, you need to help shape it. But this moment, I think, and particularly through data, is a moment where there's an opportunity to come in and actually shape that. And you have to be using the tools and using the things to sort of influence government and shape it to where you want to be doing it. And we have to be cognizant at the same time that not everybody's going to have the same access to those tools, and not everybody's going to use it in the same way. And so I think on our side, as well as on our other sides, as we're designing these tools, to really design with an eye toward equity and access.
And don't forget about community boards. Don't forget about police precinct councils, and don't forget about the ones that's attached to schools. Community education councils, right? Don't forget about the judges that we seem to have zero transparency on, like where they stand before they actually end up on the ballot. Like, those are just 4 areas that you could be targeting to be creating greater transparency and improving our municipal democracy. And with that, I would love to give a round of applause to this panel. You can continue this conversation with them in our lovely cafe, where we do have some coffee that's out there. Please be mindful of any extra trash or cans or anything like that. And then we're going to be resetting this room for the next panel. Thank you.